Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Konstantin Eggert. I work for Kommersant FM radio in Moscow, and it's my privilege and pleasure to be the moderator of the discussion on Russian modernization. And the question is society ready, and will it bring Russia closer to the West? And just to address not only the guests here in Riga, but also those who join us online, and these are young diplomacy professionals and international relations experts watching this on a live webcast on the Riga Conference website, rigaconference.lv. Very warm welcome to you too, and we hope for your questions, as some are coming in already, and of course you can also follow the Riga Conference on Twitter. The discussion today, I'm sure, because I've already spoken to the participants, is going to be quite interesting, and I would like to introduce the panel, which is a very distinguished and interesting panel. Unfortunately, the two Russian representatives, official representatives, Senator Mikhail Margelov and Igor Jurgens from the Institute of Contemporary Development, are away on assignments, so they could not join us, but still we, I'm sure, have a very diverse palette or range of views in this panel. And talking about Russian modernization today are Mr. Andris Teikmanis, who's the State Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Latvia and former Ambassador of Latvia to Russia, Professor Dr. Horst Teltschik, former Foreign Policy Advisor to Chancellor Helmut Kohl, Dr. James Sherr, Senior Fellow of Russia and Eurasia Program at the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House in London, Kurt Volker, who served in different positions in the United States State Department, is currently Managing Director of Center for Transatlantic Relations at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C., as well as Arkady Moshes, who heads the Russian Eurasia Program at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. And I would like to actually start with Mr. Teikmanis. I think that there is a lot of discussion about modernization, actually the meaning of modernization. And in Russia itself, people are discussing what kind of modernization should be had by Russia and whether Russia needs it at all. How does it look from Latvia, which is on the one hand part of NATO and the European Union, on the other hand is a close neighbor of Russia and probably tends to understand a lot of processes that happen in Russia from a more intimate perspective, if I may say so. Andris.
Thank you, Kosta. Good morning to everybody. Well, if shortly to give an answer from Latvian perspective, it looks promising. Russia is a country that has gone through several times through very major changes. In the 20th century, Russia has gone through nationalization, electrification, collectivization, industrialization, and always when in Russia such big changes occur, they are accompanied by two major questions. One is, in the beginning, what to do, and afterwards, who is guilty. Now, Russia has also a real challenge to boost its development, and as 300 years ago, Peter the Great has created a window to Europe. Now it's also a window of opportunity for Russia to get a real boost for development. What is the problem? The problem is that it should be driven by Russian elite. In the history of Russia, you probably can't remember when such modernization projects were boosted by people. It is, and it is still a primary responsibility of Russian elite, but I should say that there is a consensus in Russian elite and also outside Russia that modernization is really necessary. Russia needs this change. Due to the situation, well, 20 years or 10 years ago or now. And it's good that Russian elite is aware of it. And we could see also in the last speech of President Medvedev in Yaroslavl, this speech was very open. He pointed major deficits of Russian society, like migration, like ethnic tensions, inter-ethnic relationship, the gap between rich and poor, the situation that he acknowledged that Russia is weak and not competitive, that Russia needs modernization in production. He also put a special emphasis on development on civic society. He mentions the growth of NGOs, the growth of mass media, the spreading out of social media network as a positive sign of engagement of society. Well, why Russia needs modernization? Firstly, of course, it's a question of economy. And Russian political or economic elite is driven by economic thinking. Even I would say cynically economic thinking, not so much caring about values, but really thinking about country's economy, how to improve it. And if today 70% of Russian export is made by energy sources, oil, gas, then of course real diversification of economy is really needed. Modernization, it means also a sustainability and stability of development, and first and foremost for Russian economy. It means guarantees for property rights. It means guarantees for rights of intellectual property. Well, this modernization should be general. It can't be done, let's say, only a business-friendly environment couldn't be created only in Skolkovo. And with all the possible guarantees from the state. No, modernization means that it should be from Kaliningrad till Vladivostok. What is a guarantee? Guarantee is free and fair system of justice and independent justice. And in justice system, court system is a system that can really give the guarantees for economic rights, for property rights to business community. Modernization means also modernization in political system. When in 90s the country, the mere existence of country in its current shape was under question, then of course centralization played a positive role to bring together country. Now centralization can be questioned whether it's really needed, whether it is progressive or whether it means a possibility of stagnation. Today, the over-centralization or non-existence of or weak court system or rule of law, it can have a negative impact. It can boost also some radical potentials. If, for instance, well, the prices of energy sources will go down. I'm not ready today make any major forecast what can be development of a political system in Russia in this case. But modernization, political, diversification of political opinions, of political parties, that's what really brings stability to Russia, and decentralization as well. That means shifting the responsibility to regions, to municipalities, to civil servants, but real responsibility. I should say that Russia is not alone in this process. As Zbigniew Brzezinski in forum in Yaroslavl said, Russia's partners are ready to cooperate to facilitate modernization processes. Both EU and Russia modernization partnership and bilateral modernization partnerships are established. and these partnerships serve to this aim. I should also note that Latvia has signed a memorandum with Russia for bilateral cooperation in the matters of modernization. But certainly, as Brzezinski said, mostly the quality of modernization and implementation is dependent only on Russia, only on its government and society. And at the end, I'd like to argue with you about whether Russia can move towards West. I think the self-confidence of Russia will make difficulties to acknowledge that Russia should join West. I would say just opposite. More West, more Europe should be inside Russia. And more West and modern West should be part of Russian daily life and should be a necessity, a desperate necessity of Russians. So then I would argue that Russians will be ready to live like West. But currently Russia and its partners are still in the first phase of the question what to do.
Andris, Teikmanis, thank you very much for this excellent and provocative introduction. And frankly speaking, cynics like myself working in journalism would say that the more memoranda you sign, the more hopeless the undertaking looks. But I'd like to now address Horst. Teltschik. Germany is Russia's biggest and probably most important partner among the European nations, and Chancellor Kohl was the early supporter of this whole process of democratization and change in the former Soviet Union and then in Russia, and I think that lots of people in Russia are still very grateful to him for that. But something tells me that you might have a slightly different take on modernization and Russian relations with the West than Andris Teikmanis has. Please.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Just to add in a nutshell what the State Secretary has said, sure, Russia needs modernization. And if you read the speeches of former President Putin and now President Medvedev, if you quote them, yeah, without mentioning that you are quoting them, people in Germany would say, how can he criticize Russia so terrible, in such a terrible way? You see? Then if you tell them this is just a quote by Putin, from Putin or Medvedev on corruption and all such things and what has to be changed, they are surprised. And that's the main problem I think Russia is facing. You see, when Gorbachev started his, or pursued his policy of perestroika and glasnost, I had the opportunity to talk to many Soviet experts, economic experts at that time, who wanted to change the economic system. And it was obvious they were fully aware of the theory of a market economy, of a free market economy. And they even have read the books of Ludwig Erhard on the social market system in Germany. These books were translated into Russian already in the 80s. But asking them, what will you do now? What are the steps to implement it? They couldn't answer it, you see? And Gorbachev himself told once a nice anecdote. He said, Mitterrand has 100 girlfriends. One suffers from AIDS, but he doesn't know who the girl is. President Bush has 100 bodyguards. One of them is a terrorist, but he doesn't know who it is. And Gorbachev has 100 economic advisors, One of them is an expert, but he doesn't know it. And I think it's partly even true today, you see. I took part in many German business delegations to Moscow, and we are always telling the Russians, look, don't sell just gas and oil, you have to diversify your industry. We tell that message them now for 20 years. My impression is the Russians say, yes, we have, but they don't know how to do it. That's a problem, how to establish small and middle-sized business. Because, startups company, how to manage it. And what's the role of the administration? Because the main problem is the administration, who immediately interferes if somebody starts a new business. And therefore, I say all the time, don't stop preaching the Russians. And I always quote a very famous Russian, Alexander Pushkin, who wrote once in a letter to his friend Prince Vyazemsky in 1826 already, he said, I naturally despise my fatherland from top to toe, but I get angry when a foreigner shares that feeling with me. I think this is true for Russians, and therefore I am always say don't preach. Germans are always good in preaching. I remember when Gorbachev celebrated his 70th birthday in Moscow 10 years ago. I was invited, there were a hell lot of toasts. But there was one really great one. And this toast was made by Yavlinsky, Grigory Yavlinsky. He was a former chairman of Yabloko party. He said just one important sentence. He said, Mikhail Sergeyevich, we got the freedom from you. And now it's up to us what we will do with the freedom. And this means it's up to the Russian society to elaborate freedom rights and how to cope with that freedom. Because from above, from the leadership, they don't know how to do it. Well, if you look now 20 years later, first of all, if you compare Russia of today with Soviet Union, my first time to Soviet Union was in '74. It's a change of day and night. And the same with China. I went to China in '74, Cultural Revolution, and China today. It's day and night difference. And we should recognize these changes first. You see, not starting criticizing what they are still doing wrong. They know it themselves. Whether they change it is a different question, but they know about their problems. But my impression is, tell them first, great what you have done during the last years, what you have already changed. Welcome it, recognize it. Then you can start telling them what else they have to do and further on. And because I do believe political and economic reforms have to be initiated domestically within Russia, and they can't be enforced from outside. And well, one topic concerns me most. Since the transition started in the 90s, end of 80s and early 90s. You see, Soviet Union had one single party. And this party identified the values of the society. They communicated them, and they mobilized people for those values or their ideology. who, since the party is gone, since there is no single power anymore, who is now identifying social values, articulating them, communicating them, and mobilizing the Russians for those values, as human rights. There is no body anymore. Are these the universities? Is this the church? Who is it now? There is nobody. And how can you ask for human rights values and other values if you don't know who is explaining it, who is identifying, who is mobilizing for it in such a society? I think this deficit concerns me since 20 years. And, well, we can do something from the Western side, sending people, exchange people, to talk about values of that kind. And a last point, why I'm still quite optimistic what's going on in Russia. If you look at the economic development during the last 10 years, there was an economic upswing because of the oil price. There is some stability during the last 10 years in Russia, and mainly in Moscow. We can watch the development of a kind of middle class. And if you define the middle class because of their per capita income, the guess is that 40% of the people in Moscow belong already to the kind of middle class. On the average in Russia, about 20 to 30% belong to the middle class. And there is a forecast that in 2020, about 40% of the Russian population might belong to a kind of middle class. And ladies and gentlemen, this new middle class is a growing challenge of the existing political system, demanding for different kind of parties, different kind of representatives, combined with a growing willingness to protest against excesses of the existing political system. And this will change the country. Therefore, I'm quite optimistic that Russia moves in the right direction. We need patience, because you can't change a company who never had democracy at all. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Herr Teltschik. And just to remind those who are joining us right now on the web on rigaconference.lv that you are watching live the debates about Russia and the fate of Russian modernization. And I would like to move on to James Sherr from Chatham House. Well, you've already heard two pretty much, I would say, opposing views of what goes on. And so is it, Russia with a middle class moving towards real change and modernization under real leadership, or is it a kind of middle class moving towards a kind of change with a kind of leadership? So please, James.
Thank you very much. In order to address this audience with some credibility, I must say at the outset, with pride as well as shame, that I am not Doctor, I am Mr. Secondly, I hope the organizers will blame my sense of humor rather than my bad manners if I say at the outset that the question you've asked us to address expresses the very misunderstanding we are supposed to consider. Russia's imperative is not modernization. Its fundamental problem is not backwardness. Russia's fundamental problem, and that of its economy, is lawlessness. And the principal impediment to addressing this problem is not society, it is the system of power in the country. When Vladimir Putin came to power in Russia 11 years ago, that system of power was threatened by an independent kleptocracy that threatened to privatize the state. What Putin succeeded in doing over 11 years is transforming it into a state kleptocracy that has rendered the distinction between private and state in Russia progressively meaningless. This has long ceased to be a vertical of power. It has long since evolved, better still, corroded into a system of overlapping baronial structures held together by patron-client relationships from bottom to top. And still the rule in today's system is, if you want somebody's wealth and you want somebody's property and you are powerful enough, you just take it. And all of the structures of state, the judiciary, the police, the FSB, where needed, will help you do so. So in this system, even wealth is no protection. It's not even a system of unequal property rights. There are no property rights. There is only power. And the issue is not the absence of law. The expression rule of law has caused immense misunderstandings. Russia is smothered by law. It is smothered by an elaborate web of complex and contradictory regulations whose main purpose is to ensure that without permission and protection, you as an individual can do nothing. And you are always at risk of being stopped by one authority or another. Law in such a world, as Francois Thom said long ago in speaking about the Soviet Union, is a system of codified arbitrariness. And those who have power in this system make up the law as they go along. Literally, they walk into ministerial offices and when they want to privatize something, rewrite the privatization law. Sometimes every few months. Needless to say, all of this is by definition antithetical to genuine entrepreneurship. It cripples investment. It makes honest competition moot. And it is driving and has driven millions of Russia's best educated, most entrepreneurial, most talented, and most decent people abroad. But the main point, if we are thinking about Russia's national interest, is that this system plunders the economy. Ships sink and dams burst not because of backwardness. It is because money that is allocated for the state's necessary and worthy purposes of any state does not go where it is intended. So this whole system not only corrupts the state's activity, but its purpose. And the finance minister, Alexei Kudrin, has more or less said this themselves. Well, what I would like to suggest, therefore, is that in these conditions, strategies of modernization are strategies of denial. And it is in this context, I think, we have to understand the importance of the energy sector. You cannot operate this system built upon rent at every single level if there is not a huge, steady resource that can provide this rent without real work. And that is afforded by Russia's enormous reserve of raw materials. And therefore, it's not just critics of the system, but the upholders of it who are most frightened by the economy's hazardous dependency today on raw materials prices. Because if there's a secular change in this crisis, in these prices, this system runs into bottlenecks and stops working from bottom to top. But the other issue with this energy system, and here the issue resource curse is beside the point, because of the way it operates, it is grotesquely inefficient. 70% of Russia's gas production goes on the internal market, large proportions of which are wasted because all independent actors and stimuli and genuine markets have been driven out of the system. It is for this reason we in the West have to worry about shortages of Russian energy, and the Russian consumer worries about it and lives with it. Now my last 2 points are these, because we are also asked to consider, Chairman, the international consequences. The international consequence of all of this today is that Russia is forced to build its foreign policy influence on a mixture of diplomacy, which is often very good, but unconventional methods of policy, and that includes intelligence methods of business. Needless to say, internally and abroad, you cannot operate in this opaque world without information, and the best people best placed to have it and use it, the best facilitators, are people whose background or whose actual service is in security and intelligence services. And a natural international consequence of this is forging a whole network of alliances, particularly in the former Soviet Union, with similar structures, similar patron-client relationships, and people who are accustomed to doing business in that way. And I do not think that is a reality. I do not think Latvia is immune to this sort of activity and this kind of process. In fact, I think I could say that some far more old, well-established members of the EU do not find themselves immune to it anyway, either. But my last big point, Chairman, is this. This entire system is fundamentally damaging to Russia's national interests. Even if I were a Russian державник, a believer in expanding the power of the Russian state abroad, I would see this system as the greatest impediment, because it is not only, as I've said, a system that wastes principal resource of power, energy, it is a system that frightens people abroad, even those who are most instinctually pro-Russian, and loses influence and drives people away. So the anti-Russian position is not the position I am taking. It is defending the system that I am criticizing. That today is the anti-Russian position. And I think this, and that fact explains why a figure like Mr. Navalny has secured received so much attention in Russia, because he has exposed all of it. But he is also very much a Russian nationalist, a Russian patriot, and even a державник. And that is where I think an interesting discussion and struggle will emerge inside Russia in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James Sherr. A very forceful and strong view, and I would like to move on to Kurt Volker. Kurt, the American administration has adopted a somewhat different approach than the one just described by James Sherr, trying to reset the relations, trying to look more on the positive side. Well, do you think it really contributed to modernization, and does modernization fit in any way into the American view of Russia today? And I don't mean the TV channel.
Very good. I will address that question, and I'll try to take things in sort of the same order as James did, though. Let me start by saying, yet again, I'm sitting here and James Sherr has stolen my talking points, so I have to find something else to say now. But Horst told a really good joke, and so I'll share a joke as well, which is, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is just one, but the light bulb has to want to change. And I think, if you look at the topic of this discussion, as James did, Russian modernization, is society ready, and will it bring Russia closer to the West? And my view on that is, yes, society's ready, but the government's not. And to the point about the toast by Yavlinsky that Putin gave Russia its freedom, Gorbachev gave Russia its freedom, absolutely. But unfortunately, that freedom was then squandered under Yeltsin and then taken away under Putin. And I think that is what we see with Russia today. You can't modernize a country when you don't have any form of civil society, when all the levers of power are controlled by a few, when corruption is rampant, when the state controls all the strategic industries, and so on and so on and so on. It just can't work that way. So when Medvedev gives a speech criticizing Russia, or criticizing the system there, and then in Germany people say, well, how could he say so if they didn't know who it was? To me, that says something more about Germany than it does about Russia. It says that, in Germany it is not appropriate to think bad thoughts about Russia. And so that has to be censored, a policy of collective closing of one's eyes. And in the case of what it means for Russia, it's that Medvedev may say these things, but that's not the system that's in place. He's saying it as perhaps a means of letting off steam or of creating a facade of debate or reaching out to others, but the system has actually strengthened and become more centralized, more authoritarian, less open over time. Now, I was asked a question when I was speaking in Georgia 2 days ago by someone in the audience, pointing out a few of the factors in Russia and saying, well, isn't Russia getting weaker? And I think I understood where that question was coming from. And I said, well, that may be or it may not be, but let's be clear, we don't want a weak Russia. We want a strong Russia. We just want a better Russia. We want a Russia where the aspirations of its people can be realized, where the resources of the country can be put to building prosperity within the country, and where Russia can play a constructive and cooperative role as part of a broader community. You know, if I, and as I do, own a house in Washington, I want my neighbors to take care of their house. I want it to be an attractive place. I want them to cut their grass. I want to live in a good neighborhood. And I think likewise, if you have a house that is, you know, always needing repair, always looking ill, that's bad for me. That's bad for my house. And I think until Russia has a view that its objective needs to be to live in a good neighborhood, to build up the countries nearby, to see that successful, that's going to be a problem on the international side as well. And I think that we do see both the corrosion, as James put it, within Russia, and we also see the lingering belief in a sphere of influence in neighboring countries, which is most easily exercised when there is instability and a lack of strength and prosperity in neighboring countries. So I think those are some of the main problems there. Now, you asked about the reset policy, and I'll come to that, and I'll be emphasizing again, I'm speaking personally here, I'm not representing the reset policy. I would say that, first off, the atmosphere in the relationship between the two governments, the United States and Russia, is far better than it has been for years. Now, that is in some ways a good thing. We're not throwing rocks at each other. It has allowed dialogue about certain issues, such as Libya or such as Iran, maybe a little bit easier than would have been otherwise the case. But I'm quite a skeptic when it comes to pointing to concrete results. If you look at all the developments inside Russia that James has mentioned or that I would mention, we simply stopped talking about them. That's why the atmosphere is better. When it comes to the international issues, the ones that are usually pointed to are ones where I believe Russia has acted very much in its interests, as we would expect Russia to, and we were glad that Russia would do so. So coming up with a START treaty is something that I know was a follow-on to the Moscow Treaty and was on track with or without a reset policy. Transits to Afghanistan and logistical supplies, also something that was agreed under the previous administration and expanded under the Obama administration, and also very much in Russia's interest to have the United States and NATO work on keeping the lid on Afghanistan to the extent we can. And with Iran, the Security Council resolution and sanctions is the fourth out of 4 such resolutions, 3 of them in the Bush administration, and frankly, none of them effective in getting Iran to change its pursuit of a nuclear weapon. So when these are the results of a reset policy that are usually pointed to, I'm a bit skeptical to say it has produced results. That's not to say that it's not good to improve the atmosphere. It's also good to work with Russia where possible, and these are good things to have done. But I wouldn't put too much emotional faith that this is somehow some new thing that we have come across. And as far as where it goes from here, even my friends in the administration now, I think, are coming up a little bit dry, thinking, well, what is the next step? What happens next? We're going to have an election in Russia. It's a parlor game to say, well, will it be Putin or Medvedev that gets elected? And I think everyone believes that it's at least one of those two and no possibility of anybody else. And actually, the answer to the question is it doesn't really matter because the system stays the same. And I think we'll end up then with a NATO summit in Chicago, probably a NATO-Russia summit as well, and we may see the next summit meeting of President Obama and President Putin at that point. And then I think we'll again be asking the question, well, where does the reset go from there? I would like to just close by saying that we shouldn't give up hope, as Horst said, we shouldn't give up hope on the Russian people. And as James said, it's the people of the country who are suffering the most from the system that they're in. It is the pro-Russian view to wish well for those people, to see them live in a system that will be much more favorable to granting their aspirations and much more open to constructive engagement with the rest of the world. And I think we should be very forthright in expressing our support for those aspirations, which does mean change in Russia.
Kurt, Volker, thank you very much. And the last to speak on the panel after that, we of course switch to questions, is Arkady Moshes, the only Russian on the panel, a bit working in Helsinki. Arkady, Kurt Volker said that the Russian society is ready for modernization while the authorities are not, despite the fact that they talk about it. I think that's an important point, and I would like you to address that, if you may.
Thank you very much. I'll answer that question in a minute. But let me start by saying that it's a great pleasure for me to be here. I certainly cannot be a substitute for Mr. Jürgens, who is a committed enthusiast of Russia's modernization. I'm just a researcher. But I think it's actually a good idea to invite a researcher to discuss this particular question. And not because researchers have less limitations in expressing themselves, but because when discussing an academic and hypothetical question, you need an academic. We cannot be talking about the process as what is happening and what will be the result of that. We cannot be talking about the Russian situation as if it were modernizing. Yes, if we think that it gets more internet connections, yes, this is modernization, this is a new society. But we probably mean something else by that. And this is actually where I start. And one of the most important points in characterizing today's Russia, one of the conclusions that we have to just draw, is that the current Russian leadership has a very specific view of Russia's modernization. It's a technological modernization. Yeah. You buy more computers, you buy better medical equipment, you create an exterritorial Skolkovo where special people will be invited to do special jobs, and some European companies' representations will move to Moscow, from Moscow to the Skolkovo, just to show that they are implementing the Memorandum of Understanding on Modernization. But this is technological modernization. So basically, it makes this whole discussion slightly less relevant because the plan does not involve the society. It might be modernization for the people as it is conceived, but this is not modernization by the people as the government sees it. And there is a very clear reason why. The name of this gentleman was mentioned on this panel. He came to power in the Soviet Union 26 years ago. He thought that involvement of the society would be critical. He thought that securing public support would be critical for what he was doing. And we know what kind of fate was awaiting him and the state that he was running just 6 years after he came to power. So the current Russian leadership learned that lesson well, that allowing too much freedom and relying on too much involvement of people might not really be a good idea. But let's imagine, as I promised, we're talking a hypothetical talk here, but let's imagine the government wanted the involvement of the people. Analytically speaking, it would immediately face 3 very big obstacles in the current situation. One would be the resistance within the vertical of power. But before I actually go through the 3, I have to probably explain the methodology. The methodology is that if you want to understand Russian society today, one thing which you need to know is that this is a very rational society. The rational choice theory is the best that explains individual behavior of people at the moment. There is no ideology left with some nationalist ideology, but even these people are not really ready to sacrifice much for the slogans that they pronounce. There is no readiness to go build another Baikal-Amur railway or to go work in the north because of the grandeur of the country. I mean, you should pay them money to do it. And the thing is that if you apply the principle of rational choice to the three cases which I'm going to show, you will see that we are actually in trouble. And one is, like I said, it's going to be a resistance within the ranks. If you are a mid-level Russian bureaucrat today, what is the rational choice for you? Actually to do nothing. Because the probability that you will be punished for inaction is actually very small, but the probability that you will be punished for failure if you do something is pretty considerable. Because you are responsible to the superiors, you're not responsible to the people. And that's not one and the same thing. And some of these people are honest, some are less honest, and of course if we think about middle class and use the definition which we heard here today, if we measure it in terms of the per capita income, then I'm afraid that the most likely candidate to be called Russia's middle class would be a corrupt police officer. And I'm not sure that this person is dying to see his representative working differently in the parliament. I just don't think that he cares, because his life, he arranges his life differently. Second of shameless self-promotion. We published a book earlier this year which is called Russia is a Network State. What works in the country when the state institutions do not. And we are arguing that actually there are quite many things that are quite functional. But the problem is that it has little to do with the system of vertical of power as it is designed and proclaimed to operate. Footnote finished. So the second point, if you're able to somehow rearrange your ranks, the people there, you get to the second problem. The second problem is the growth of paternalistic feelings and expectations in the society. In the 90s, life was very bad, but many people learned how to swim in the turbulent and rough waters. In the last 8 years, the life got better, objectively much better. And your choices today are either to expect or demand that the state does more for you, basically gives you more money, or take a risk. What will you choose? I mean, many just expect that the state will be there forever. And if you look at such thing as Russia's budget, and if you measure how much the social expenditure is growing from year to year, you will see that this signal has been translated quite directly and powerfully to the decision makers. The decision makers know they will be in trouble if they now go back to the early 90s and tell the people, you've got to take risks, you've got to modernize, your salvation is your own business. This is impossible. I'm not saying there will be social unrest or revolution. Russians had enough revolutions in the past century. But certainly the ratings of support for which probably President Obama would kill would be unattainable in the current situation. And my third point about the rational choice is that, okay, of course there are people who are unhappy. They want to take risks. They want to choose what is better rather than what is easier for them. What do? They emigrate. There is I don't want to quote opinion polls. Opinion polls are awful, but I mean, I don't think they're totally reliable in the sense that the question, would you wish to go, to which 1/3 of the population says yes. I mean, it's not a reality. The reality is that people go when they can go, not when they want to go. But the official statistics says that in the last 5 years, 1.2 million people left. 1.2 million of mostly educated, I believe, but in any case, those who are competitive in external labor markets. That means Russia has lost kind of more than the figure implies. And I would have a reason to believe that this statistics is actually not correct. It's not correct. No kind of evil doing, but it's just the system. The same goes for Eurostat. The official statistics just doesn't see a lot of things. Eurostat still keeps saying that only 600,000 Russian citizens reside in Europe, which is, I'm sorry, a mistake, because it only counts those who have this particular permanent residence permit. Doesn't count students. with special kind of residence permits. It doesn't count the pendulum migration workers. It doesn't count the former citizens of Russia who have acquired the citizenship of European states and renounced Russian citizenship. So we might be seeing the top of the iceberg in both cases. I know that I've exhausted the time that was given to me. It's a very, the picture which, as I see it, is actually very worrying. But my final point, would it be good for Russia to modernize? Of course it would. Of course it would. A more modern economy would probably mean a more modern society, better aware of its rights, better able to face the problem of lawlessness, as James mentioned. It probably would bring Russia closer to the West. It brought China closer to the West, in the sense that the relationship, the China-West relationship now is totally different from what it was 20 years ago, let alone 40 years ago. Even though, I mean, nothing is ideal in this world, but this is a relationship which is more workable. I think the same could happen to Russia. So the West should be, of course, interested in Russia's modernization. It should be the West's interest to encourage Russia's modernization by all means, rather than to just watch and observe what's happening. But I'm afraid I'm known to be equal when I resort to bashing. I mean, I don't believe the West is doing what it could be doing, like, to the best that it could be doing. But as a researcher, I mean, I'm not going to preach. I'm certainly not going to preach democracy. What I wanted to say is we know why the West now looks with a very calm, tranquil attitude to what's happening in Russia. Because the relationship has indeed changed in the last 20 years. Because Russia is not really as much of a threat or something that can be portrayed or conceived as a threat by the EU-NATO community as a whole. I mean, there are different voices, of course, but as a whole, people don't see Russia as a military threat. They see that it's a globalized economy, and most importantly, they see that they can develop the economic partnership along with the current model, no problem, for as long as it stays. Because Russia, yes, it does play sometimes geopolitical and geoeconomic games, but essentially it's ready to sell its energy to the West, and essentially it's ready to buy in the West and spend the money which it earns selling the energy. To my students, including those in the European External Action Service, I'm showing a graph which is absolutely parallel. The more Russia buys, sorry, the more Russia sells to Europe, the more Russia buys. They go in absolutely parallel. These are absolutely two parallel lines. So the West is not uncomfortable with today's state of Russia. Some analysts would even say it would be a problem for the West if Russia really modernized and was able to do import substitution. If it joined WTO, if it managed to reform itself from within, if it started to produce not only price competitive but quality competitive goods. If finally Russian cars, 100,000 Russian cars more on the Russian market would probably mean 100,000 foreign cars less. Not necessarily. So there is even this line of argument, which is not very well pronounced, but it's known, that maybe the West is not in a hurry to nudge Russia in that direction, despite all the nice words. On this optimist note, I'll better stop.
Thank you very much, Arkady Moshes. Before we go into questions, I just want to remind those who still haven't joined us on the web, please do it, rigaconference.lv, where you can see the live webcast of this debate about Russian modernization. As well, you can send your questions by Skype to Lato, L-A-T-O, _ LV, and we have a bit of a problem with Skype, so I would like to ask our volunteers to come and probably help me see whether there are any questions coming, because I do think there's a problem. In the meantime, I would like to ask, before we switch and before we go to the audience for questions and remarks, does anyone from the panel have kind of a burning desire to have a 30-second intervention, anything that was said by other members of the panel? No? Okay. I see a lot of hands. Please, of course, identify yourself, be brief and concise. Gentleman in the pink shirt, please.
Thank you. Thank you, the Center for Geopolitical Studies, Georgia. So I agree with this distinguished panelists that Russia needs modernization and engagement. It's much better when confrontation. But if we talk about modernization and partnership, there should be common rules binding for all equally and without any exception. Just two examples. In 1999, in Istanbul, on OSCE summit, member states signed agreement, so-called adapted CAE treaty, and according to this, Russia has obligation to withdraw his military troops from Moldova and Georgia. Today we face absolutely different picture, reinforcement of Russia military infrastructure on the territory of Georgia. In 2008, in August, Russia signed another deal, so-called six-point agreement, but just recognize two obligations, forget about other four. So my question is, how we can deal with country and how we can engage country who often forget about his obligation. Thank you.
Who is the question addressed to?
To the panelists.
To the panelists. Well, okay, then who wants to answer? Oh.
Well, I would like to ask that question because we are facing so-called frozen conflicts now for 20 years. And suddenly we faced that one frozen conflict got hot. This was Georgia. Yeah? And for a simple reason, neither the Western Europeans, the European Union, nor the Americans have ever had a strategy how to cope with Russia on such issues. You see, who took care of Georgia for a long time? Who takes care today of Transnistria, of all these frozen conflicts? Who takes care, besides perhaps the neighbors of Belarus? Who takes care from Western Europe and the United States really on the Ukraine? There is no strategy. You have doubts. But I'm watching very closely the foreign policy of my government and of the European Union. There is no common sense how to cope with these issues. And therefore, we have to live with these conflicts. Is there any strategy?
Konstantin?
Yes, please.
Could I just jump in on that as well? To add a thought to this. Of course, I agree with Horst. I mean, there isn't any serious strategy. We do have frameworks. We do have the Minsk process. We do have the 2+5, I think it is, for Transnistria and so on. But these haven't produced any results over any period of time. And I think, thinking about the case of Georgia, you shouldn't expect this to produce results over any near period of time. The Geneva process is a joke. And so it's just not going to produce results. But the strategy of getting your own country right, democracy, economic reform, fighting corruption, integration with the global economy, making a success out of that, that is the long-term solution. That's what will attract people to Georgia and will bring regions back together. I think the Caspian region and the Caucasus region has tremendous opportunity if people just focus on good governance at home.
Thank you very much. We have a question coming from the from Latvia, actually, on Skype to later underline LV. The question is: the EU has recently launched a partnership for modernization dialogue with Russia, exporting its know-how to Russia. What can we, ostensibly the EU, get in return? Shouldn't we put some benchmarks? I would like to ask Andris Teikmanis to answer this question.
Well, I think here probably the proper word would be not benchmarks, but engagement and mutual engagement. I think we can't push Russia to modernize its society. We can't push Russia to stipulate the creation of a middle class, what Professor Teltschik said. I think that's a very essential part to create a middle class, independent middle class that is protected by law. Well, of course, we can have in Moscow quite a number of people who could be added to middle class. Well, let's ask, how protected are these people by law? Either they count to middle class or not. I think, well, it should be a political decision and political necessity of Russian elite. Well, you can put number of benchmarks, any you like. I don't expect any results if, on other sides, there won't be a real engagement for it.
Thank you very much. Next question was here that I saw the gentleman in the red tie. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Alexei Melnik, representative of Razumkov Center. It's an independent think tank from Kiev, Ukraine. I share all the concerns about Russia's modernization. As a representative of the country which feels probably more than other countries, the international consequences, as James Sherr said, of the Russian problems. And also we feel the consequences of Russian culture, business culture imported to Ukraine, of Russian foreign policy, energy policy, and so on. So my question, but at the same time, as you know, we have very close relationship. My question is, what do you think about the role of neighboring countries, especially Ukraine, in changing Russia? I mean, don't you think that this is probably the best way or the shortest way to the Russian society?
Alexei, who is the question to?
I think James Sherr.
James Sherr.
Ukraine is obviously in Ukraine is in a unique position, because when the Baltic states, and even what Georgia, to some extent Georgia has, if they turn their backs on the Russian model and say this is not for us, this is something that is not undermining and unnerving to those who have power and influence in Russia, because those countries have history and identity of their own. From a Russian perspective, Ukrainians are a branch of the great Russian people, and therefore if Ukraine were able and determined to turn its back on a Russian model and make another model succeed, I think in the mid-term certainly, and in the long term, the results in Russia would be not only unsettling but profoundly beneficial, because it would no longer be possible to claim, as the current people in the current setup do, that there is a special, unique Eastern Slavic course, that there is an alternative value center, an alternative a part of Europe that is not suited to the values of the European Union. But that puts a very great burden and responsibility on Ukraine itself. And so the key question for Russia as well as Ukraine is what's going to happen there.
Thank you very much, James Sherr. Kadri Leak, please, and Klaus Wittmann next.
Thank you. I'm Kadri Leak from ICDS in Estonia. First, thank you for your statements. It's a superb panel. And I quite agree with a statement made by someone that Russia's society probably would be ready for modernization. I even think that a substantial part of the elites would be ready as well. I last time visited Moscow in early summer, and I participated in discussions held by people who belong to United Russia or people working for the government, not anti-Kremlin liberals. people were discussing change. People were wanting a controlled handover of power to happen. Just it remained unclear who should hand the power over to whom and who should control it and how. So, I mean, I'm curious whether the Russian political system has not reached a sort of dead end and become unreformable regardless of a desire to reform, which would not be surprising given that corruption and kind of client-patron relationships are the basis of the system, kind of organizing principle, and I fail to see how you can eliminate these without bringing down the system itself. So my question is, do you see an evolutionary way out of this situation? Or will it be a kind of major breakdown, a revolutionary change? And if that happens to be the answer, then what sort of policy choices does that leave the West with? Because our official policy have to be to encourage evolutionary change through modernization, etc. Who feels like answering? I don't know.
Please, who cares to answer? James, please.
Very quickly, to be very candid, I think that this will not change until there is some kind of external shock, something which makes the rules of this system untenable. Arkady rightly mentioned the example of a great statesman who came to power 26 years ago. Long before he came to power, he understood the system is corroding from within, but what gave him and his group of people the authority and put them in a position to change it was a fundamental change, the fact that the West rewrote the rules that existed in the 1970s and that Russia relied upon. Today, we will not be able to rewrite the rules unless, in my view, we do something fundamental, something changes of a fundamental nature in the energy sphere. This would have a major impact. Ukraine adopting a different course would fundamentally change the rules. We saw two examples already. After 2004, Russians began to ask very radical questions because they were very worried because of the Orange Revolution. After 2008 with the financial crisis, the same thing occurred because people were seriously worried. Radical questions became legitimate and necessary to ask. Both these cases, these shocks were not consummated, and therefore they went back to business as usual. Without that kind of stimuli, the system will find a way to maintain business as usual.
I see Horst Teltschik strongly disagrees.
No, I don't disagree fully, but partly. External shocks might always be helpful to change things domestically. We face it just with the Eurozone. You see, there's a shock, quite a shock, and therefore the question is whether we are moving forward with integration or not. But there's another approach. I do believe that it's up to the Western world whether we can encourage changes by incentives from our side, by telling the Russians, and it's a little bit similar to Turkey, that at the end we would like to have them as part of the European community. What Gorbachev has once said, a common European house, that it's our interest that they belong to Europe, and it's our interest to become close partners and friends, because then we take out the wind of the sails of those who don't believe in cooperation, but in rivalry, in an autonomous future of Russia not being integrated anywhere. I think if we tell them, look, you can, what the Swiss partner once told me about Switzerland, he talked about external integration. That meant to be able to integrate, but not integrating. Yeah? This is how Switzerland believes is the right way. They can join the European Union tomorrow, but they don't like it. But partly, they are very close Schengen they have already accepted. And this is a kind of way we should offer to the Russians. Move in this direction, and we will establish a special relationship between Russia and the European Union. We will take you in the long run into NATO. We already have the NATO-Russia Council. Why not once taking Russia into NATO if they want? In the case of Georgia, the main mistake, I know that there are many opposing it. I'm in favor. In the case of Georgia, the main mistake was that we had a NATO-Russia Council which didn't meet during the Georgian crisis. You see? Why did we establish this common council if it doesn't work in a crisis?
Thank you very much. Grigol, just 2 seconds, please. We have Klaus Wittmann, then we have a question from young diplomats, and then you. Klaus, please.
Klaus Wittmann, ASPM Institute, Germany. I apologize for taking the floor one more time, but on the NATO-Russia aspect, I would like to repeat something which I already said last year in this conference. I have always thought that reset is a flawed metaphor, because we do not only need a restart of the computer, but we need a new program. And that would include, on Russia's side, some new thinking in security policy as part of the much evoked modernization, but also on NATO's side, it would demand a self-critical acknowledgement of our share of the responsibility for the worsening of the relationship over the last 15 years. And I know what I'm talking about because I was present when Putin made his famous speech at the Munich conference in 2007. And in both regards, Russia and NATO, I have laid out some details in my piece in the conference papers, which you found in your package. Both sides, most importantly, must overcome zero-sum thinking in security policy, where allegedly one side can only gain at the expense of the other. And in my mind, all this would not lead to NATO membership of Russia, but to a genuine agenda at 29 in the NATO-Russia Council, and perhaps also to an honest dispute about the Medvedev proposals for Euro-Atlantic security structures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klaus Wittmann. And we have a question coming on...
Konstantin.
Yes?
I'm here. It's me.
Ah.
Look the other way. Can
I'm sorry, yes, of course.
One sentence.
Yes, yes, please. I thought Skype suddenly came alive completely.
You can call me Mr. Skype now.
Yeah. Mr. Skype, please.
General researchers comment, there is a fundamental structural problem that whereas Russia's membership in NATO is not possible, that's the official position. Mr. Kosachev recently wrote an article where he said the discussion is over, it's not possible. It was a useful discussion, but forget it. It's not possible, not least because of China, that Russia knows what kind of consequences might follow from this close security alliance with the West. So while membership is not possible, anything short of membership is not suitable, because whatever partnership council and whatever nice name for the council and whatever rules of setting the agenda for this council we might invent, the veto is not there. This body will be fine not taking decisions, and decisions can be taken consensus, so by consensus. So this is a problem. And I agree fully with what you say about the need to rethink, to overcome, to change the whole ideological underpinning. But, I mean, in practical terms, I just don't know how to fix that.
Thank you very much. A question coming to later underline LV from the Young Diplomacy Professionals Forum. Is there an anti-Western, like anti-American mood visible among Russians, and if so, how it will affect modernization? Who would like to answer this? Arkady.
I can say a couple of words. I mean, you can always, if you want to point a finger, you will always find people. You can always find documents even which you can interpret in a certain way. I would say that, well, 2 points. First, the Russian public opinion is very much dependent. It's no longer an independent variable. It's a dependent variable on what the TV broadcasts. We know how much the image of the United States changed for the positive in Russia since the start of the reset. Just because we, out of a sudden, for 2.5 years, started to listen that Americans are partners. And before we were hearing that they are not exactly. Washingtonsky Obkom, for those who understand the Russian language, would be the best label. This party committee in Washington telling everybody in the world what to do. That was the image before the reset. Now it's much better, and you see it already in the public opinion. So it's in a way volatile, but I think systemically Russian public opinion is now not anti-Western. You have nationalist quarters. I don't know if they will grow and strengthen or not. But let's say the majority, the responsible part of the population, now knows, it has a fairly positive image of Europe at least. It's whether it knows the success story has been created. It's whether it wants its children to study. It's where it buys real estate. It's where it spends its holidays. I don't think that the Russian people, remember what I said about the rationality, that they can be this schizophrenic to do all that and then still to think that the West is the enemy. I think you wouldn't put your money into Western banking accounts if you thought the enemies live there. So I think that there is a positive process, but of course there are fluctuations which we need to be aware of.
Arkady, you just sounded like a plug for the Finnish consular service, which issued more than 1 million visas last year. But Mr. Teikmanis has 30 seconds.
Well,
intervention.
short comment. I think it's some kind of paradox. Well, NATO consists of 28 member countries, and relationship to these countries and perception of in Russia regarding these countries, it can go ups and downs, but basically it's not so bad. Whereby NATO as such is still perceived as aggressive military bloc.
Thank you very much. Before I give the floor to Minister Vashadze, I want to say that we have another 7 people and we have about 15 minutes to go. So I would like to ask you to be brief. Minister Vashadze, please.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to speak about Georgia. As a former Russian citizen, I would like to use my privileges and talk about Russia. Now, Russia is moving to a right direction. Respectfully, I can't accept that because this is a matter of taste and economic views. If you are BMW or Mercedes-Benz dealer, of course Russia is moving to a right direction. If you are Russia's neighbor, then you definitely will argue that. And Russian citizen, by the way. Second important thing is that we are all speaking about modernization if this is proclaimed task of anybody except a person who is going to say goodbye to us very soon. Gentlemen, modernization is just another special operation. And Russian political elite, today's Russian political elite, is not thinking in political terms. They are thinking in terms of special operations because of their background. and excuse me, there are much bigger contradictions than necessity to modernize and absence of desire to modernize. First, most important thing is that you cannot modernize without freedom. And well know that. Freedom. Without freedom. You cannot have a market, open, functioning economy without democracy. And if you would like to bring to me examples Eastern, like Eastern from Russia, we'll discuss that I think later. I will give to you. Yeah, we'll discuss it later too. And you cannot combine absence of democracy inside the country, imperialism in a foreign policy, when you are proclaiming the goal to restore the former Soviet Union, at least 2/3 of it, and at least in economic terms for the beginning, with modernization. Second huge problem is that you cannot simply modernize the country of 17.5 million kilometers with 125 million people. It's absolutely out of question. There is not enough workforce in Russia to produce anything. 40% of plowable land is abandoned. This is the official figure. I don't know what is the real one. Tasks and existing government. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Mr. Moshes. You are absolutely correct. We are speaking about monumental tasks, and we are speaking about a government which treats its own country as an occupied region. They are keeping their wives, bank accounts, pets, mistresses in London. And they are flying down there on Saturdays and Sundays to have a real life. Yeah. And they are in Russia as if это вахтовый метод. Получение прибыли от газа и нефти. And last fundamental thing, contradiction. As a former Marxist, I'm a lot of former things, you know, former Russian citizen, former Marxist. The last contradiction is that population simply cannot live with this vertical or absence of vertical. You open Russian blogosphere, and it's a hatred. It's not opposition. It's hatred to tandem, to those two chaps and everybody who surrounds them. What we want successful Russia, because Russia is not going to be aggressive. Is it achievable? I'm afraid that we are not going to see that. Thank you.
Anyone wants to? Horst Teltschik is
from my side, a short answer.
Coming to the Russian rescue.
I had to deal a lot with Russia in politics and later on in business. It's easy to criticize Russia all the day. It's easy to talk about the deficits, lack of freedom and whatever. The question for me is, we have to live with Russia in Europe. And Russia always played a decisive role for peace and stability in Europe. And therefore, my answer is, we can't leave them just by themselves. We can't leave them alone. I care a lot where Russia is going. Sure, I'm a German, and my experience in politics is in Europe, there are two countries who have to care most of Russia. This is Germany and Poland. And my political goal is a very simple one. What can we do that Russia goes in the right direction, which keeps peace in Europe stable? That's so simple. Criticizing is easy. To change things is difficult. And never say no in politics. I watched several times in politics where the majority was saying never. It will never happen. German unification will never happen. It happened, certainly. Yeah? A few years ago, 83, 84, the Soviet Union was threatening with a third world war. Well, where is Soviet Union anymore? Think about China, Cultural Revolution, millions of casualties. Where is China moving? And look at the interests of Russia. Look at the borders. They have only one peaceful alternative. That are they are Europeans. And we have to cooperate with them and to find solutions, not just criticizing.
You are watching live broadcasts of modernization in Russia debates on the website of the Riga Conference, rigaconference.lv. We have about 10 minutes to go and we have 7 questions, so please be very short and concise. Bakhtiar Aslanbeli from Baku, please.
Thank you, Kostya. Just a really quick question, because the question already raised by some of the colleagues. The distinguished panelists already provided their view on what the potential modernization of Russia could and should mean, and it's mainly about political structure. And the foreign policy element, of course, one of the main elements of that modernization in the political structure. As a person coming from South Caucasus, I'll just give some short example of the current situation of the foreign policies of Russia. The ultimate goal of Russia in the region is to become main political power. At the same time, in the meantime, Russia directly or indirectly involved in all the conflicts in the region. And there is I can't see really the real willingness from the Russian political management to solve any of those conflicts. So that's in full contradiction, what happens with the ultimate goal and the action of the Russian foreign policy. So the question is, I would like James Sherr to answer that question, if that's possible. What do you think, sir, how the potential modernization of the Russian political system could impact Russia's foreign policy strategy, especially in the neighborhood regions? Thank you so much.
Posture as briefly as I can.
Yes.
If there were real change in the direction, systemic change of the sort we talked about, the changes, I think, would be profoundly beneficial for Russia, because many areas of natural influence for Russia would become areas of genuine political influence that would not arouse apprehensions. Our energy relationship would no longer arouse the type of apprehensions that it arouses. Russia's approach to NATO would be formulated around a totally different set of questions from those that it puts to us today. The proposition on the table that Russia puts to NATO today is, we want equality with you, by which we mean co-management of your structures, but on the basis of our own separate interests, which you must recognize, and our right to have a sphere of influence of our own. And although 28 members, NATO allies, have a lot of differences and a lot of disagreements about Russia, there isn't a single NATO ally who believes that any of those points should be conceded. Now, a Russia that modernized, not a la Medvedev, not a la Skolkovo, but by means of real institutional and elite changes, would no longer be speaking to NATO in that way. And then we would really, then the ball really would be in our court and we could start to get somewhere. The problem today is we can care about Russia as long as we want. They don't care that we care. We can talk to them as long as we want. We are good talkers. They are good talkers. Arkady is right. There's, the rational interests here. And until conditions change that alter those calculations of interests for that elite, we are going to continue to have this discussion, and this whole problem will just continue to go on.
Thank you. Very briefly, because Kurt, I have to say we probably have no more than a minute and a half to go.
Then I'll come back later when you wrap up, but
I'm not sure we even have a time for wrap-up, because so you just said now.
Okay, well, I want to come back to this question and to the one that Klaus Wittmann raised as well. I think that there is a fundamental asymmetry in the way that NATO, the West, is looking at our cooperation, is looking at security issues, is looking at regions surrounding Russia, compared to the way that Russia looks at that itself. It is very much, as James said, it is an elite or a leadership of Russia that views things through a prism of power and money, whereas a different kind of government, one that was responsive to the needs of its people, would be interested in health, education, infrastructure, economy, stability. Those are the things that one would seek to promote, and where I think the Caucasus has a lot of potential. You would want to resolve these conflicts rather than seeing the perpetuation of these conflicts as some form of perverse interest. And in the NATO-Russia Council, it is again an asymmetry, where NATO bends over backwards to try to find ways to work together with Russia because we believe it's important, while Russia promotes an extraordinarily negative image of Russia inside, and then we'll do something like invade Georgia, which then causes us to respond to that, and then we never really get anywhere. Thank you.
I have promised a question to Mary Dejevsky from The Independent. Very briefly, Mary, please. From a Russian-British newspaper, should we say now, that Alexander Lebedev publishes.
Speaking in a strictly personal capacity, I would just like to ask Horst Teltschik to respond to the diagnoses of what's wrong with Russia today, as presented by James Sherr. It's a corrupt power elite, nothing can be done without getting rid of it, and from Arkady Moshes, that all the incentives for change actually are working the wrong way, and they're all in favor of the status quo.
Teltschik, just 30 seconds, really.
Well, talking about corrupt elites, I can mention a hell lot of countries where there are corrupt elites in power, yeah, and we deal with them. We just try to throw one out of business with whom we did a lot of business in Libya? That's a very difficult question, well, we dealt with, when I started in politics, we had to deal with Brezhnev. Was this a nice guy? We had to deal with Ceausescu. Was this a nice guy? But we had to. I could mention a hell lot of politicians we have dealt with, and we had to. And we can't ask, are you serious? Are you not corrupt or not? No, they are in power, they are responsible, we have to deal with them, whether we like it or not. Or we tell them, we are not interested at all in you, and this is a danger for us at the end.
On this note of realpolitik, I'd like to close this discussion. Before I ask you to thank the participants, I just want to say that for those who were watching this very interesting debate live on rigaconference.lv, you can continue watching it with a discussion by Vladimir Sokor and Ansis Bogustovs, a fellow of Jamestown Foundation and a Latvian journalist, late after the broadcast. And for the participants, the volunteers will be at your service to guide you to lunch. My name is Konstantin Eggert, and I would like to ask you to thank the participants for a wonderful and engaging debate.